Hello, my name is Danielle Tavares-Rickson. I'm an AU Core TDG co-chair, and so I'm one of the leads for the Australian Patient Summary Project, and I'm also the Spark Fire lead. Typically, Heath would be delivering this, but you're going to have me for the next couple of sessions, so this one, the next one, and maybe the one after, to go through some things. I'll just go through an acknowledgement of country and that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap. I know there are a lot of people who have been at all the meetings, which is fantastic, and building out that proposal, but not everyone has come to all of them or managed to make it to like the last one. So overall, what we've been trying to work through in these conformance sessions, and these are a bit of a working kind of call, is get a base understanding for fire conformance, both from the basic through to the bleeding edge, which is kind of where we're living at the moment, and then also work through what does it mean for patient summary to conform to AU Core and IPS. That's our goal. That's an agreement for this project. And out of that, we're putting forward a proposal for conformance for Australian Patient Summary, taking into account our local requirements while making sure that we are also fully in alignment with IPS's requirements so that an Australian Patient Summary acts like an IPS for systems and situations and contexts that need an IPS or can deal with an IPS but aren't familiar with an Australian Patient Summary. So this is really what we're doing to now. We're identifying proposing requirements. This is for the purposes of ballot for comment, which Australian Patient Summary is about to get to. This is the last of our kind of substantive forming calls. We got through a lot in our last call, and those successfully passed approval of the project. So we've got our actor definitions in, we've got a whole kind of baseline set of requirements, and what's down to it today is around emptiness and missing data and suppressed. So let's just go through that recap. We've been through quite a few of these things. And the goal really was to get that proposal ready for a ballot for comment purpose. And we're down here on this last kind of workshop to prep a set of content, a substantive actually set of content that will impose some conformance requirements and bring it to the AU Fire IG call next Friday for that review by the project to approve it. And then it will go into the ballot for comment. So that's what we're going through today. I'm just going to do a quick link off to here, especially for people who haven't been here or have missed a session or really want to get up to date. There is a Confluence page set aside for this content. And this Confluence page lists all the different sessions we've already gone through. It has all the recordings of them, all the slides. It has the links off to what we've been looking at. And it has like the future set of meetings and where you're going to join. So this is a pretty key page to be familiar with. What is it? Is it? I don't think it's on here. We should add the Zulip. So if you have any questions, I know I've got it in this little widget here. So if you have any questions about content, you want to raise things, propose things, discuss, have questions, you should always bring them to Zulip. That's going to take forever. So yeah, here's one I prepared earlier. So this has all sorts of topics around core and different events and questions people are asking. And there is one on patient summary conformance. This is where we put announcements of things. So this was where we had said, hey, look, the next bit that's coming up is this thing around missing data and empty and suppressed. And here's how you can provide, here's how you can see the proposal, and here's how you can provide feedback. So that's where all of this lives. Okay, so I'm going to go into a quick recap. But before I do that, I do want to call out that this is a working kind of session. So at any point in time, you have a question, you have a comment, there's something you want to diverge into, put your hand up. You can use the chat. I'll try to monitor that. I might miss things. So if there's something that needs to be answered or a topic that would be useful for us to talk about, it would be great if you could put your hand up and then I could call on you and we can discuss that and have that recorded as part of this session. But let's just cover a quick recap. Here's where we are. So last session, very meaningful. All of that got approved. So great job, team. We agreed on these things. We agreed on the actor definitions and the conformance rules. And we'll just have a quick look at that. And this is what's coming up now. This is our new one today, is missing, empty sections, and suppressed. Okay, so this is what we've already approved. We're having an AU patient summary producer and an AU patient summary consumer. Producers are systems that create or assemble a patient summary, which is a bundle, as this is a FHIR document. Could be through automated generation or human curation, and it's based on the IPS ACTA. And by based on, we do mean inherits all the obligations and the requirements. So when you implement the Australian Patient Summary Producer, you are meeting the requirements of implementing the IPS ACTA as well. And with consumer, that's the system that consumes a patient summary. We're calling out here that's a bundle, because again, this is a FHIR document. We're being specific here. Uses it to display or process in a patient summary kind of context. It's based again on the IPS ACTA. It inherits all those conformance requirements. By implementing our ACTA in Australian Patient Summary, you will meet all the compliance rules for an IPS equivalent ACTA. So this got agreed. So that's what's in place for the ballot for comment, which is where we're going to go out for that wider consensus view to say to the community, this is where we're going for Australian Patient Summary. And then we can get that early direction and feedback to work through before we go out for a ballot for a working standard. Okay, here's the specific details. And we're bringing this up also because this is where we start to fold in the fact that there are requirements for both of these actors around the different parts of suppressed data, missing data, or empty sections. So here's what we've worked through. We've said our patient summary producer shall comply with the requirements of the producer IPS. It shall implement AU patient summary bundle, composition, and patient. They are the three minimum, no matter what you have to, profiles implement. We inherit this from IPS. You shall, for each mandatory section in the patient AUPS composition. For those of you who are coming into the project a bit new, we've not made any other sections mandatory. So it's the same mandatoriness that we have inherited from IPS at this stage. And for each of the mandatory sections, you have to implement the patient summary profiles referenced by that. And that means these. You have to implement allergy intolerance, condition, and you have to implement at least one of medication statement, medication request. You can do both, but what's recognized by IPS, and we've adopted that, is this is a choice. A producing system can have implemented all of its medication data in just one of these resource types. Now we go into some shoulds. So should for each recommended section, again, that's the IPS recommended sections. We've not changed that in Australian Patient Summary. So you should implement the profiles here. So you should implement, we've got some examples. There's quite a few recommended sections. We've gone, hey, there's an immunization profile, noting here there's an IPS profile that's called out, and there's procedure. There's quite a few more, like device use statement. We then come down to two other kinds of sections. So there's those that are defined as optional. Again, this is inherited from IPS. We've not changed anything. So some sections are declared or labeled, I guess, optional. Then there's this concept of undefined sections. Intentionally for patient summaries in IPS and Australian patient summary, there's this idea that you can define additional sections for additional pieces of data that you want to convey that aren't yet standardized through these FHIR standards. And so in the circumstance where the section is optional, or where you have an additional section that you want to define, we do have some recommendations. So we say that you should implement the profiles referenced in the AUPS bundle. So even if it's your own section, don't implement a different idea of allergy intolerance. You do need to be still implementing the same kind of base level of information that one would need about an allergy intolerance. If there's no AU-PS profile referenced in the bundle, have a look towards either AU Core or AU Base if they have profiled those resources, and we think that you should be implementing those. I'm not seeing any hands up so far. Good, let's keep going. So next bit, we're back to the shalls. So you shall implement the obligations defined, essentially defined in this implementation guide, in the profiles. So for every single element flagged as must support, there is an obligation code defined that's set by FHIR that says what the rules are, and they are defined for one or both actors. Producer, consumer, you have to implement those obligations. That's what the real conformance requirements down to the level of shall display or populate if known or able to populate or all of these terms have set. In some cases, there isn't an AU-PS profile because we have no reason in Australia yet to localize it, and we've referred to the IPS profile. And in those circumstances, the obligations of that IPS actor apply. Then we get down to the subject of today. We're saying that you shall implement the requirements on suppressed data when an element is not allowed to be shared. You shall implement the requirements on missing data when an element value is not known, and you shall implement the requirements on empty sections when information for a section is not known. So these have been almost placeholder statements because we have yet to propose the real detail of exactly what are those requirements. We said these requirements are relevant, and today is all about what is actually those requirements. Any questions on this so far? All right, let me pop to the next one.
So I didn't have one.
Oh, sorry, Talwinder, yes?
Uh, with respect to the vital signs and the observations, I see there is a vital sign section within the composition. But if I have, and blood glucose doesn't come under vital signs as per AU code. So
It
if
is covered by, hang on, let me just go to it. So we have the statement, the profile referenced in the bundle. It is a should here.
hmm,
That should is really taking into account that some people can do narrative only. It's allowed for some sections to be narrative only. You do not have to have implemented structured content for every section from patient summary perspective. But going to the profiles referenced in the bundle, we do reference the AU core vitals. Actually, is this view big enough, or should I make it one bit bigger for people?
It's fine.
Okay. Coming down, you can see in our bundle, and this is the patient summary bundle, we do list the AU core vital signs profiles. Does that kind of go to your question, Talwinder?
Yeah, I can see option here as well as the within the composition there is a section for the vital signs.
Yes.
So where should I put, like, in should these go in both the places or only in one of them?
They would have to go in both. Every entry in a composition must be listed in the bundle. It's one of the rules on how to construct a FIRE document. We should pop that in the chat for you. There is a set of, here it is. This is the link, and that gives you some of those rules that does have that reference requirement to have it in both places.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. All right, if there's nothing else people want to ask a question about producer, I'll pop on to consumer. Oops. Here, and then let's go this. Okie dokie. So we start the same way, obviously, because our patient summary consumer shall comply with the requirements of the IPS actor. So same thing. You shall implement bundle composition patient. You shall, for each mandatory section, implement the profiles. This is all the same because at the mandatory level, it is, well, it's the same. You shall, for each recommended section. Now, this is where it gets different. This is a shall, because a consumer who declares they can consume patient summary documents, you don't know if the producer is only doing one of these or none of these. The expectation is that if someone says, I can consume AU patient summary documents, that you can, in fact, consume AU patient summary documents. So you can consume the immunization resource if one is provided. It's a should to implement for the producer, but it's a shall for the consuming system. Same thing down here. Now we go to shall implement the obligations. In this case, it's the consumer obligations. And where we don't have an AUPS profile, you shall implement the IPS. Like if we reference off to an IPS profile, you shall implement the consumer IPS obligations. Okay, last bit. We'll have a question about the wording of this later on, but we have a call out here that you shall consume resources containing must support elements that have missing data, suppressed data, and empty sections. So this is the matching twin to this one of saying you shall implement these requirements. And we're saying for a patient summary consumer, you have to be able to consume resources that have these requirements implemented. Any questions on that one?
I want to just point out as well, it's more than just not error like we do in AU core. There is actually a handle associated with obligation on this. So when we say consume, we're actually saying you need to handle this, not just accept it.
All right, I'm going to move on. So that's our background. Where we're up to is actually getting to the specifics of what is this empty section business, this missing data business, this suppressed business when it's in a patient summary. We answered missing data and suppressed data for AU core, but we also, now that we're in a patient summary, which is a FIRE document, we now also need to deal with empty sections, and we need to look at going across all our requirements. How do we comply to both to IPS and to AU core? Okay, so here's what we're going to propose and have a look at a very high level. We've got kind of two categorizations. There's reasons something isn't present. So missing data and empty sections. That's been broken into 4 categories are being proposed. It's an assertion, so a statement of known absence of data. So where we say there's no known allergies, it's basically no known X. So no current medications, no history of procedures, that kind of thing. That's already present in a number of specifications like AU Core, and IPS has guidance about it. So we need to be clear on what we mean in our context. There's this next one, which is known absence of data due to workflow. This has started to become a bit of a topic. I think we could put something out for ballot for comment. I'll sense check that with this group in this session. So that's where the data isn't known due to workflow. So maybe some things weren't asked. That's the reason it's not available. That's different to both of these next ones, which is called missing data and empty sections. In both of those circumstances, there's no information. So not only do you not have that information in your system, you don't know the reason you don't have that information. That's what makes these two different. And they're split to missing data is an element level and empty sections is section level. Any comments or questions about this categorization? All right, I'll move on. Let's get into a bit more detail. I'm going to soon go into the actual specific pages, but we've got a couple of slides to try to abstract out the real wordy, abstract away from some of the really wordy detail to just the what are we trying to drive at. But before I do that, I forgot to put this slide in. Good, I'm so glad I did. Standards context. So what is being proposed today comes from a bunch of different sources. What we've got on the left here, the ones with the ticks, are our primary sources. So we're really pulling in AU Core's missing data at an element level, IPS's empty sections, AU Core suppressed data, and AU-based work on coding known absence due to workflow. The reason we're doing that is they're our primary things that we inherit from and comply to, as well as the fact that AU Core's missing data and element level has already done the work to reconcile and be fully compliant with US Core, IPS, FHIR documents, FHIR clinical documents, and IPA. So we can just go, we need to be compliant to AU Core. Let's look at their requirements because all of that work was done by AU Core and R1. Very useful. Thank you, AU Core. Same thing with suppressed data. AU Core went through and did all of that assessment and has reconciled all of that through so that the AU Core requirements on suppressed data are fully compliant with all of those other potential international or other national standards that are relevant. IPS sections is a little bit unique because US Core isn't a clinical document. IG, neither is AU Core, so neither of them talk about it. I should have taken out IPS there and didn't. Oops. IPA also isn't a clinical document definitional standard, so it's not mentioned there. What's kind of interesting is that neither the FHIR documents, so that's part of the FHIR standard, talk about it, and neither does the FHIR clinical document FHIR IG, which surprised me actually that they don't give guidance on empty sections. I think maybe if we come to a position in Australia that we're happy with, I think I would raise a suggested change request up to the international group to consider the adoption of what we're working with. What the FHIR standard does do is have 3 standard ways to do all of the things I was just talking about. So we're talking about, you're saying no known allergies, or you're going, nobody asked this, or you're saying, I don't have this particular piece of missing data, whether it was the data procedure was performed, or who performed a particular observation, or whether you don't have an entire section's worth of data. So there's a whole heap of sections in patient summary. It's unlikely that every single patient summary document would expect to populate all of those. And then there's also the circumstance of where you're not allowed to share the data, whether that's an entire section is something that's been viewed by that system as something that you're not supposed to be sharing, or whether it's actually at an element level or a resource level. To do all of those, we only need to adopt standard bits of fire. There are 3 tools here. The first one I've bothered to call out because everyone finds this incredibly familiar these days is what we call DAR, or it's the data absent reason extension. So there's a lot of examples of that in AU Core and US Core and also in IPS on how you could say for something like when I was saying you don't have the data procedure was performed, you could include a data absent reason extension. Also, if it was a suppressed piece of data, you weren't allowed to share that, whatever it was, you can use a data absent reason extension. The next standard fire mechanism, and also has guidance in the fire standard, so both of these do, is what I've called resource.coded element. So that's where you would say in an allergy intolerance, you would fill out allergy intolerance.code with the SNOMED concept for no known allergies. So that's where that is most often used. It's also fairly frequently used for known absence of data. The last one comes in because, again, we're a document, and that's all about sections and section emptiness. And it's also about known absence of data due to workflow, but for an entire section where you want to say where it's important to actually capture that section, but say why that section isn't available and that it's due to a workflow reason. All right, I'm going to go into more detail, but how is everyone going? Are you with me so far? All right, so we're not proposing any new extensions or anything like that. We're just saying there's these common things that we need to say. So we're really going to be providing some guidance and requirements, and they can all be done through the fire standard, basically. So what we're going to be putting forward is to say, if you have this, here's how you say that, so that producing systems and receiving systems can be clear around where they are saying, I don't have this, and I'm not actually telling you it's due to an absence of data or anything else like that, or where you're actually saying, of which there are a whole number of requirements, things around saying to their patient has no current medications. So that's really what we're doing, is providing the guidance on how to use these standard fire elements in order to do that. And we're going to be fully compliant to US Core, IPS, fire documents, fire clinical documents, and IPA, and AU Core. Very nice. So let's go into it. We thought we'd start here because this is a really familiar point for AU Core, and I know a lot of people on the call are coming across with AU Core. So this is, to be honest, the same, right? It's the same, but in this case, we're just calling out the actor. So we've got 2 ways of viewing missing data, where it's must support and optional, and where it's must support and mandatory. I suppose the uncaptured third category is where it's not must support, but we don't care about that. If we don't flag an element as must support, that means we are not saying anything about it. Just be valid fire. So missing must support and optional data, same as core, same as US core and everywhere else. If you don't know the value for an optional element, you shall omit it from the resource. Do not include optional elements that where it is missing. So you don't have the information in your source system, and you can't declare something like, we know that the reason we don't have this was due to workflow, or that the patient has no current medications. So in that circumstance, omit it. The next bit is, well, I can't omit it because it's mandatory. So in that case, and there's quite a few mandatory elements. Sometimes that's around dates, especially for observations or things like that. Dates are often mandatory. Not every system will actually have a date for a procedure that was done or an observation that was taken. They may only know the value. And in these circumstances, if it's mandatory, you have to include it. And we're going to just adopt the AU core requirements. Does anyone on the line want me to go into the AU core requirements, which are the same as the US core requirements? If no one wants me to walk through those, won't take up our time in this call doing it. Instead, I'll say, I think this is fairly obvious and simple. And in fact, to a degree, in order to be compliant to AU core and IPS, we have to do this. I don't think we need to do anything extra. I think this is fine. I think we just keep going the way that US core, AU core, and everyone else does. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this proposal? Who's happy with it? Who thinks we could do more?
Do you want to do more?
I don't, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not the, we've got a group here.
Yeah. No, step change, yeah.
All right. If everybody's comfortable, then I'll move on to the
Just
next one.
quickly,
Oh, no,
my
go,
comment
please.
was I started rewriting this and it was just like, I'm rewriting this. So it just felt easy just to point over there.
Oh, yes. Instead of copying and pasting all of AU Core's requirements, an exact example to just say, go here. It's already well defined in a nice page. Just do that, please.
In some of the other sections like suppressed data, we actually refer to individual actors in AU core, whereas in this section we don't. It's pretty generic. So we rewrote the suppressed, which we're about to go into, I think. But because we got different actors, but in this particular case it was generic, so it just didn't feel like we needed to rewrite.
All right. Let's move on to the next one then. Okay, actually, just to confirm for people, that means that I will take this proposal on missing data to the AU Fire IG call next Friday for approval. That's what we're putting forwards, is this one. All right, let's talk. Oh, no, it's empty sections next because this is also emptiness. So guys, this is element level. Okay, so this is specifically element level. But because we're doing patient summary, we suddenly run into this, but the entire section is empty. And there's a different way to kind of do this. And we've kind of had different conversations about sections. What came out of last call from our conformance session is that people did not want, let me just flip back to the side. People didn't want that if a section is optional that I have to omit it. People wanted to have the choice because it was meaningful for their business case to be able to include an empty section. So that's the proposal that Heath and I have written up because that was the conversation last call, that if a section is empty, you should omit non-mandatory sections, which is, the majority of them. But that you don't have to. It remains the choice of the implementer as to whether or not they are choosing to omit the section or not. So I'll open that up now. Is that where everyone was going, Marika?
I just worry that using should as opposed to may is stronger than what is currently in the international spec. We are definitely in favor of it not being a shall omit non-mandatory sections. We would like to still populate non-mandatory sections with an empty reason. But yeah, just question the use of should over may.
So I guess it's a recommendation, right? We would like you to omit, because the problem with this is if you start to include things like emptiness in every section for a producer, then every consumer has to handle emptiness for every section, including those that they don't know might come along. So that's why we're saying actually we would prefer you don't do it, because then we can turn around to the consumers and say you don't actually need to worry about emptiness unless, except for the mandatory ones.
Ooh.
All right, so unlike AU Core, the obligations are so strong on a consumer in AU patient summary because they have to handle everything. You've got a choice as a producer what you populate, but unfortunately, a consumer does not.
Let's have a quick look. So that for what you're talking about, Heath, that we can have some of that. Scroll down. Differential. Okay, so I'm going to scroll past and I'll make that a tiny bit bigger. The mandatory ones, that's not in question. We're talking about optional. And optional runs the gamut from, actually, this is probably a better view. Where's IPS gone? The IPS. So I guess what we're talking about is that it's all of these sections, right? Because each one of these is a section. And the worry that you're raising, so the preference from you, Marika, is that you would like to, and also have it be fully recognized as totally valid, that you would like to instantiate every single one of these sections with an empty reason?
Any optional or recommended sections that we've implemented, we would like to populate with an empty reason if there is no data available.
Mm-hmm.
So like we can do that with the should, and I'm happy with I'm happy generally with the current wording of that statement. It's just the question mark over should versus may. But if it is an additional requirement that you're concerned about on consumers, then that's fine. We can still meet our business case with the current wording. It was just a question around that.
So I
Yeah, but
think the other thing
I'm
I
actually
want to
concerned
raise,
about should, to be honest. Go on. Anyway.
you want to have shall? No. Okay, I don't agree with it.
I'm
but
just saying I'm still worried about should. So I'm not saying that
No.
it should be shall. I'm just saying I'm also worried about should. Because if
I'm gonna
Marika's going to
throw.
put it everywhere, then effectively we're going to have to say to the consumers, you need to be able to accept this everywhere.
No, not really, actually, because I'm going to throw a cat amongst both of your pigeons.
Awesome.
On all slices is title and text, not empty reason. Empty reason is must support only on the mandatory sections. Empty reason has no national or international level requirement for support for consumers to be capable of processing. See it in, this is a recommended section. Oops, sorry. Has no empty reason there. So the fact that someone wants to put it in and might want some business agreement with someone to consume it at this point, totally silent and outside of the scope of what we're putting forwards. What the obligation ends up being is that at a section level, it's always this bit. But we stop saying anything about empty reason later on, which is very interesting.
Yeah, so technically you're right. There is no obligation on the consumer to
We
do
even
so.
stop it on entries. We just go section.
Yeah.
Section title text is all that has to be populated and consumed.
But I think there's a modifier on empty reason.
Let me check.
Or is there a constraint, a general constraint?
They're only
No.
on the mandatory ones.
Okay.
So there is the constraint on the mandatory ones. You have to provide an empty reason if there is no entry. From recommended onwards, there is not.
Cool.
So, I mean, I would go back to you. What's your use case, Marika? Why are you putting it on everything, including things like, can't remember what were some of those optional ones were, patient story. All right.
So we haven't actually implemented patient story. So our use case is to demonstrate what data a consumer may expect is available, because we're iteratively adding to the patient summary, and also there are differences in what patient summary may be available at each practice, because there are version dependent, like each of our practices is acting like a little file server. And depending on what version of Halo is installed at each of those practices will depend on what is able to be retrieved. And so we wanted to be really explicit and say, you haven't been not provided this because you have been, this is supported and implemented and available at this practice. There's just no data there, as opposed to if we're silent on it, and we have partners who are integrating with 2,000 different clinics, and they get a patient summary from A and a patient summary from B, and they're in different versions of Link. If we're silent on those optional sections, we don't actually have a way for those partners to know, are we silent because there's no data available, or are we silent because this practice is running a different version? So we just wanted to be super explicit so that when they're looking at our docs and they go, why is this not there? It's visible without doing additional troubleshooting steps.
So can I just clarify one thing? With your incremental implementation, if you haven't implemented patient story, then you won't populate in
Correct.
patient story. But once you do, you will populate it with no information if there is no information.
Correct.
Just to indicate that there is capability, but in this particular case, there is no information.
Correct.
Okay.
Let's do a poll. Let's do a poll for create or for create. May or should, I mean. Hang on, how long does it take me to create a poll? Not very long, I think. Let me just pop one up.
We've also got a hand up from Talwinder.
Oh, Talwinder,
I apologize if I've butchered your name.
On the question I have, like, if someone is still keeping the producer is still keeping the optional element and not the section is there within the composition, for example, medication, but it's not adding the reference to it. So there's no entry inside it. Will the patient summary validator reject that request or find out that
there's invariants. You can test it out now. There's the build is up there. It depends on what it is. You have to be conformant, but the profiles have the rules on that. It's not really what we're talking about today. I think you're talking more about profile level conformance.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is when you're saying should, let's say if producer is not doing it, who is stopping it? So just by the wording or the system can hold it out.
It's conformance testing. So when we're mechanically doing this, as in through Inferno, then we would give a report to say something along the, if you did populate it, for example, we might turn around and say, you're not necessarily a non-conformant, but the recommendation is don't do this, or something along those lines. It's a little bit different to the kind of conformance things that we do. But otherwise, if it does go further into like more strict conformance profiling later, if the government looks at doing that, then there would be like more formal conformance scenarios around this.
Yeah.
Where you have to justify
This is all
why you're
behavioral,
doing it or not doing it.
Talwinder. This is behavioral, not
Yeah.
automated conformance.
It's not
So
schema orientated.
But isn't that be protected if the section is optional, but the entry inside it is mandatory? If you are
The
in the
entry is not
section.
mandatory. No entry is mandatory in patient summary. None of them are.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying from the consumer end, consumer still has to read if the section is coming, he still has to read this entry inside it, and the entry
Yes.
can be
Well,
empty
actually, it
or
does not have to read the entry inside it. You need to look at the profile and what its conformance requirements are. Not every section entry requires a consuming system to read it. Optional sections do not, undefined sections do not. Only recommended and mandatory sections have must support on entry. It's in the profile for AU patient summary composition or IPS. It's also in IPS. We've inherited the same rules.
yeah,
I
I
mean, I hope
understand.
you read them all, but you're not required
I
to.
got your point. What I'm saying is, for example, medication is something as a consumer, if it will come, I'll read it. If it will not come, I'll not read it. But what we are saying, if producer don't have the medication statement, it shouldn't send it to me.
I
And it
think
shouldn't.
no, that's not well. We're saying if you don't have any medication information in your system, this is section level. So
Mhm.
no medication information in your system. That's what the section is about, not a single instance. So if you have no medication information in your system, and this bullet point doesn't cover that because medications is mandatory. This is for the optional sections. So that's for patient story and
Yeah, other sections, optional
devices and
section.
so forth. It doesn't cover allergies, problems, and medications. They're all mandatory. We've got more bullet points once we get past this first one. And if people on the line could vote, that would be great.
So Twinder, I'm not sure that you've actually attended too many of these sessions so far, but sorry if I've missed you along the way. But there's been sort of a long discussion around what is must support and how do obligations work, etc. So you may want to perhaps go back to at least the first session and watch the video. But basically what we're talking about here is in cases when the cardinality is optional, there is obligations stating further requirements that are unable to be determined by a validator. They are more business related requirements from a conformance perspective. And although that we don't have strict conformance at the moment, it is sort of guidance at this point in time. And the obligations have some pretty fuzzy, deliberately fuzzy statements around them, around things like, if known and if allowed to share and all sorts of stuff here. So it gets
I'm going to
complicated.
need to wrap this convo up. We've got 10 minutes left in this meeting. I will say, Talwinder, the questions you're asking are perfect for next Friday's AU Patient Summary Fire IG, where we're going to go through the composition. And I think that will answer your questions around what do I actually have to do for this particular section or not. I think it's more that profile. Let's walk through that in specific.
Interesting poll results.
They are. I'm going to close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End the poll. I will share the results. Alrighty. So we're going to take forwards should. I will see what the community says next Friday. So we're going to put a should to them. And Marika and other people who wanted may and the person who wanted shall can come along to that meeting. And I think try to have that conversation there and we can see whether or not we land with should for ballot for comment. And then in ballot, raise the issue. If you think you have a strong argument, if should gets across the line, remember all we're really doing is having an intent, putting it out for ballot for comment, and then we attract okay, where is this not working for you? And we can work through that in ballot reconciliation. Okay, Brett, Landon, can I ask you guys to be quick so we could get through more?
Yeah,
Brett first.
I was going to ask for clarifications, but there's a hole that you walk through if you don't need to populate empty reason, which is that you can put there's no data here in the text, or you can put data in the text only, right? And I kind of think we need to think about it.
Great.
It's, yeah.
That's ballot
Anyway,
for
that's
comment.
it.
Sounds amazing. I don't think we can answer it now. Landon?
Just super quick, because I was happy with should, but I think Heath had a preference for shall, and I was just looking for his reasons. Was it a preference, or
No,
they
next Friday. Next Friday. Move on. Move on. We're going to
Okay.
have to. It's in the recording. But if otherwise, we're not going to get through anything
Just-
else. We've got 8 minutes.
Sure. No worries.
I didn't actually indicate that, and that's not my vote. I did not vote.
Oh,
didn't.
perfect. Sorry, misinterpretation. Awesome, thanks.
Okay. Now we get past this, which is held on by the skin of its teeth to should, to mandatory. So there are 3 problems, medications, allergies. 3 sections. They're mandatory. So, also, this would kick in for downstream IGs, I think, if you decide to make one mandatory, but we can argue about how to downstream IGs adopt it later. Okay, mandatory section. It shall be present anyway. You can't omit it. Got to be there. If you don't have this information, your system doesn't have any allergy information for this patient, or medications, or in some other circumstance, any conditions for this, and you don't know the reason it's absent, so you don't know the patient has no current medications. You don't have medications information. You also don't know why this information is absent. There's nothing recorded in your system saying, oh, this wasn't asked, or it's suppressed in some way and people are allowed to know that. Then you need to populate composition section empty reason. That's the standard FIRE element for doing that. And you're going to use the code unavailable from the list empty reasons code system. That's this proposal. It's different to the DAR one. This is what's bound in the FIRE standard. It's only preferred, but this is the recommendation from IPS. So it's proposed that we adopt using this code unavailable from the list empty reasons code system. Another bullet point? No, not for this one. So that's the when a section's mandatory. Okay, comments, questions on this one?
No issues, looks good.
So just a quick question to you, Marika. You're using no information. Are you using no information? Where are you putting no information? What code are you intending to put in empty reason? Because no information is not actually one of the codes.
We have unavailable.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sounds fantastic. Now, we're going to put in a warning. This is not a conformance requirement, that people can use empty reason to do things that aren't just this. So this isn't the exact text in the IG, but just for everyone on the line, be aware that empty reason there's a whole value set behind this and some other things. You can say other things, like this is where we're going for workflow, by the way. So I'm going to pop to workflow. I'll just get rid of that. So we're going to take these empty sections to next Friday's call. And then whatever gets past next Friday's call will go out to ballot for comment, and people should put their enhancements, their questions, their case for why some of this should be stronger or weaker in that ballot, and then we can work through each of those individual comments over the next couple of months. Right, okay, let's move on. Suppressed data. Okie dokie. So suppressed data happens at 2 levels. There's element level, and we inherit AU core. It is the same. But there's also, because it's a patient summary document, sections. It is feasible that some sections are meant to be hidden because someone doesn't have the access rights to see that particular section of data, but can see other sections. So we need to talk about in our patient summary document how you do both of these cases. Now, when things are suppressed, that first bullet point is, I mean, that's the proposal. We could try to split it, but if it's optional and it's not allowed to be shared, omit it, is the first point. The second point is if it's mandatory element and it's not able to be shared, you follow AU clause requirements. You use unknown or masked. We should have a link here off to like AU clause requirements, because this is the AU core requirement, where you can use either of these codes depending on your particular system implementation and the circumstance. And then we have the section. Apologies, I didn't put that up. So if a mandatory section isn't able to be shared, or it should actually be allowed to be shared. So now we have the code either unavailable, which is this equivalent to unknown at the section level, or withheld, which is the equivalent of masked, but coming out of the value set that's bound to section empty reason. So it's basically the same approach, but they are two different codes because it's a different value set that is bound to composition section empty reason. So that's what's proposed. If it's optional and you're not allowed to share it, don't populate it. If it's mandatory, so you have to have something on the wire, you follow AU clause rules and you use the data absent reason code system with either unknown or masked. If it's at the section level, then you're populating composition section empty reason with unavailable or withheld, again, depending on the circumstance in your system implementation. So it's actually quite, I think, follows on really well from leveraging from AU Core and into a document space. But I'm going to open that one up for comments and questions. I know we've really only got 1 minute to go, but I can be here for a bit longer for those people who are able to stay around and provide and continue this discussion and provide some comment into this section. So, is anyone looking to do something different? Will this be a problem for you, or does this make sense?
Marika, can I point you out again? What are you thinking about? Sort
I
of
just
this?
pinged my PM, Millie, who's also on the line, asking the question about the shall there. We haven't hit suppressed data yet, but we
Right.
know that there is a use case that is down the track for us. So we might need slightly more time to consider, unless Millie wants to jump off or jump on the mic. If you have.
Nick will probably kind of call out, and they can come to next Friday, right?
Yeah.
Because what we're really doing is forming a proposal for next Friday's call. It doesn't mean that you don't get to argue against this proposal next Friday just because you're at this call. So you totally can.
And maybe very briefly, I'll give a little bit of context here. I were looking to go down the route that we did with AU Core in particular, which was putting in some, if you're allowed to know, then you do this. If you don't know, if they're not allowed to know, like the clients, the requesters, if the requesters are not allowed to know, then you admit. Otherwise, you let them know that it's masked. I thought in the case of patient summary, because we don't know who the recipient of this is, that we had to kind of be the more, I can't think of a better word than strict, as in we had to assume that they shouldn't know that something was masked, and hence why it's more of an unknown scenario rather than the masked scenario. In the case of the shell, that is.
I think I would potentially be happier if the resource and elements are split out. So resource and elements not able to be shared at shall, and the section was a softer, like a should or a may. for the reasons I've already described before, and then we would be able to fall back to unavailable without giving away any additional information. They don't know if it's unavailable because they don't
Yeah.
have permissions. Like, it doesn't change the behavior on the whole or the surface area on the whole on our end. It's, yeah.
That's a good point.
I
They would
think that
actually be
makes
more
sense.
consistent. Yeah. Yep.
That was what I was
Can
thinking.
we get? Oh, good. Yes. Sorry.
And sorry, yes, Millie, the PM. I agree with Heath. If they, yeah, I agree with Heath in terms of the strategy. It's just the interaction with the previous discussion point, where we want to be able to say unavailable if it's missing data. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the first doc point just needs to strip out the optional section bit and make that a should, so that it aligns with the missing data approach.
I think then we would be happy. And that would
Well,
meet our
we still have
user.
to say something about optional sections. So we need to
Yeah.
we need to come up with a wording. What is that wording? Do we put it down here and go, if a section, and we just take out the fact that it's mandatory, it's not able to be shared, we just say use blah or blah. That's one way to do it. Or we could try to have 2 bullet points, one about an optional section and one that's mandatory.
My initial thought was splitting the first bullet point and say, if an optional section is not able to be shared, it should or may be omitted, whatever we decide. And then a second bullet point that says, if an optional resource or element is not able to be shared, it shall be omitted.
So the last dot point is actually a shall. Like, you have to do something, Danielle, because it is mandatory. So you have to
Yeah.
populate it with something.
So I'd
So-
be in
and-
favor of not mixing the optional and the mandatory.
Yeah. So I think we need a
Well, I think
fourth dot
it's-
point.
No, but my concern is that we fall into a slight gap then of it's optional, but I've included it, but then I don't have to what? What do I do then?
No, so it's missing, but it's missing because it's suppressed, right?
Yes.
So the missing data rules apply. It's a shall, but now we're actually saying because it's suppressed and not missing, you should use unavailable or withheld in the context of it missing.
Which would be, I guess that's what I'm getting to. We can't just say for optional, you may
Yeah,
omit. We have to add but if you do include it, you shall do this.
But
It's like
to align-
you may omit, but if you do include it, then you shall do one of these 2 things.
in missing data, we said it's a should for optional sections, but in this section, we've said now it's a shall. Right, so we've actually got inconsistency between what we said in the missing data and the suppressed data. We've strengthened
No,
it
we
here
don't.
for suppressed data for the optional section we have.
We have.
I don't think we have. That's why we've said missing data is separate from sections. Section level is being handled by empty sections.
But we've got guidance about sections in suppressed sections.
Yeah.
Yes, suppressed is dealing with both missing and empty. It is. It's doing both of those things, where I'm quite fine with us splitting bullet points so that we have a element level and a section level.
Sorry, I was using the word missing data, not empty section. So that might have been what you were objecting to. I meant empty sections.
Oh, well, that's fine. Yeah.
So in empty sections, we said should, but in this particular dot point, we've included section where we've, along with the missing data of resources and elements as a shall. So we've strengthened the empty section statement for optional sections.
Yes,
So that
but
needs to be
suppressed
split out.
data is not the circumstance where you have no data and you don't know why. Empty sections is where you have no data and you don't know why.
Yeah.
I disagree that suppressed data is emptiness and you have no idea why it's empty. That's not what suppressed
Yeah.
data is.
Good point too.
I think, sorry to jump in, what we were talking about just before though is in the case where we don't want to let the consumer know that the data has been suppressed, at least having had a minute to think about it, I would rather be able to surface the same kind of response that we would for empty data, an empty section, so that the consumer can't tell the difference between whether this data was just missing in the database or it was suppressed.
So how about we say optional? So this mandatory one is used. It's basically a shall, right? What if we say with optional section, then we can say like it may be omitted, but if included, you should use the code unavailable or withheld.
I think that's good. I think that's a good compromise. It provides the consistency, but the guidance that is needed.
Yeah, I think it's explicitly stating what's required. Yep.
All right, that sounds good.
And just merely as well, like we've said unavailable and withheld, we just haven't put the information around, like we haven't put the conditions around it. It's completely up to you which one you use, right? So we're not saying that you shouldn't use withheld. We're just not saying that you should if they're not allowed to, kind of thing. We're not giving you the conditions around it. I
Yeah,
leave
that
it to
works
you.
for me. Yeah.
So that's
For
why
sure.
it's a little bit vague here.
Yeah, no, that works well, because if there are cases where for some reason we do want to say this is suppressed, then we can use withheld. So yeah, that works perfectly for me.
All right, we'll take that. Unless there are objections or any other tweaks that people want to make, I'll rewrite that and we'll take that to next Friday's call. As here's our baseline that we want to take to ballot for comment.
That sounds good. Thanks, Danielle and Heath.
That's all right. Don't run away. We've got more. If people can start, I mean, for those of you who can, there's more content to take to next Friday. For those of you who can't, I understand. There's also the Confluence page and everything in there if you need to asynchronously like pop some feedback in because you can't be on the line. But I think we've got maybe another 15 minutes worth of stuff that I'm just going to take through with those people who can stay. And I'm going to get onto it. And aha, it's this bit. So where I don't know why I have put the slides in the wrong order. Okay. Ah, I must not have slides for this. Well done, me. All right. There's the bit that we're going to go through then that is just let's look at the actual IG. And this is now the other two parts. So I think we've covered off missing data. We've covered off empty sections. And we've covered off suppressed data. So that's 3 of the 5 things that we wanted to get through. The other 2, I'm not going to jinx this, but I hope that won't be that tricky. Okay. Here's what we've got. We've got known absence of data. This is no known X. So no current medications, no history of procedures, no known allergies. That's not missing data. And we're saying that you shall populate, you should be populating an entry in accordance with the relevant profile. So you should actually be providing an allergy intolerance and populating this in accordance with the profile specific implementation guidance. And we do have them for a lot of the resources. So I've pulled out one here, which is saying this is the concept or the an example of the concepts to use. You can say no known allergy. You can actually say no known and get specific with SNOMED. So that's categories and specifics. So that's the expected approach for this. This is in AU core, it's in US core, it's also in IPS. And so I think we should be clear that missing data is not the same as this thing. We do expect you or think that you should be populating a resource, and you should do it the way that that particular resource says you should say there's no known X. That's the basic idea behind this. Is that in line with people's expectations?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. And Heath, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say we're targeting more so the mandatory sections, not to say that it can't be applied to the others, but they're the main ones that we've got guidance for.
All right. I mean, this is an attempt at writing up, yeah, what we talked about last call. So, all right, good. Let's move on past that. Then we've got the next one. This one's a little bit different. This is known absence of data due to workflow. Now, this is a little bit special, but we've really been seeing a lot of this coming through in AU base and then into AU core and then carrying on because this isn't truly missing. Both at a section and an element level, you might actually have something recorded in your system, like prefer not to answer. You don't actually have a value. What you have is a reason there isn't that particular value. And that's becoming, I think, much more important for us to have some clear, consistent ways of doing it. And so it's proposed we have that we carry forwards in an unambiguous way that same approach into AU patient summary. So where in the system, you don't have information for a section, or depending on what it is, it could be an element. But what you have recorded is a reason why, like which might be prefer not to answer, depending on what it is, or asked but not known. There's a couple of other ones, but these are the two that we already have mappings for in AU base. Then, and also then this is the not asked one, where the workflow hasn't allowed you to actually get that information, which kind of goes to the needs of some implementations that want to have all the sections included, but they also have reasons that this is meaningful to be recording in their system. Like we do have this, but due to the workflow, this wasn't asked. So that's the proposal, is that if you have a known workflow reason, and only where you have a known workflow reason, you shall actually populate that. You shall put that in section empty reason. And we've got 3 codes that we currently recognize, which we can add more to. I'd like to end up with a value set, but I think I want to take this through ballot for comment to see where everyone's at before I would propose a value set for this. All right, I'll open that up.
I think that I agree with all of the codes that you've proposed, and I agree with this in principle. Just possibly think the introductory sentence needs a little bit of clarity around wording, because sections and section empty reasons. So at the moment, this reads like if you have, it doesn't clarify between mandatory and optional sections. So there's potential for confusion there.
And that was intentional, actually, I think. But was it? Let me just double check the composition.
There was a little bit of introductory stuff before the section before.
Yeah, because I think you don't. I do agree that it's only a. It's a. Let me go back to it. Lost this. I think it's a shall for mandatory and a may for optional stuff, but it depends on the composition level of population, because not every, that's I think what I was relying on and why it was absent. Sorry, Heath, you go.
I was just going to say we've got the no known X for the mandatory ones as well, so there's kind of a bit of an overlay in
They're
that
not
particular
workflow. That's not
yeah.
workflow.
So that's a should, but if there's a should, but then you've got a shall on top of that kind of thing, like yeah.
The
How do
nil
they
known though
interact?
is different. There's a clinical assertion that that's someone has to have that explicitly in the workflow.
Well, there's still a clinical assertion on this one as well.
Ooh, not necessarily.
It's a workflow assertion.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's clinical, but yeah, you're saying that there's a, but if
Well,
Can
it's
they
a
coexist?
nurse. Yeah, exactly. It's that interaction that's probably a little bit unclear.
Okay, so mandatory sections shall, other like optional sections should. So we
Happy
put
with
that
that.
forwards for ballot for comment. Yep. All right, and then we can, you know, get it better through that for comment process. Okay, well that's it. That did take a little bit less than 15 minutes. Well, or rather, actually, I'm going to stop sharing and actually say that's it for the list of things that we had to propose initially. What is there anything missing? And sorry, also Heath, you popped your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to also just say that effectively what we're looking at doing there is augmenting the empty reason list value set with the data absent reason values that Daniel was proposing. So it actually will be this more enhanced list of empty reasons because we're now drawing on the specializations from the data absent reason
Perfect.
value set. So to get that extra level of granularity that we're looking for. So I wasn't sure if that was clear.
All right. Did we miss anything? Is there something people think we need to be saying around missing data or emptiness, or I guess really some reason or circumstance where a clinical piece of data isn't available in a system? That's right. You'll have many weeks to identify that during the ballot for comment. So I'm going to take that, I'll rewrite based on today, those refinements. We'll take it to next Friday's call for a baseline we put up for ballot for comment. And then through the ballot for comment, we'll ask people to go over it in that more finer grain, where you think there's things that we haven't mentioned or circumstances, or maybe where things won't work, or the wording. And then we'll, I guess, resolve that through that reconciliation process. All right,
Daniel.
magic job. Magic job, people. This is tough stuff. All right,
Good
I hope
effort.
to see you.
I must admit that when you're working through all those scenarios, you're sort of imagining is it a conversation between systems, usually was what I guess our minds are thinking, and yet sometimes, oh, there might be a person there that you're exchanging with, so that you can say, hey, you forgot that missing field, yo, put it in there. So it's the joy of developing software.
Thanks,
Great
guys, for
effort.
your input over the last 6 weeks. It's been heavy going, but I think we've got somewhere that we can start with at least. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No worries. Look, I'm going to be missing for the next couple of weeks. I'm going to go and hang out in Kakadu. So first time up there.
Right time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be back on the week of the 21st or something like that.
All right, well, we can look forward to, you won't miss the ballot period entirely.
That's right.
So
I'm
good.
already registered. Don't worry.
Oh, good.
Thanks a lot.
All right, I hope to see most of you at the next kind of call, where we try to get a baseline approved to go to ballot for comment, and then we can go to town. I know I'll have a number of items or things that I think that we could get more specific on through that process. But yeah, again, really great work, everyone. I appreciate your time on these Fridays to come through and try to form up this proposal. I think it's a really solid proposal. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Heath and Danielle.